Hey boys and girls, I'm back again. I just wanted to go over the reading and writing for today. So yesterday you were in the performance assessment book and you responded to Fly Away Home. What did you think of the story? You're supposed to talk about Andrew, the main character, and really how brave he was. And we were relating to the setting of the story to the actions of the character. So, Andrew found himself living in an airport with his father, and so he had to act a certain way. He was only 6 years old, and he was offering to return carts for people. He had to kind of fend for himself while his dad was away for the weekend working. So I was a little surprised that he was 6 and being able to do all those things. But again, that's kind of because of his situation, because of his setting. Had he lived in an apartment with his dad, he might not have had to have been so independent. Okay, so we're going to continue to look at how setting influences a character's actions. And when you're looking at this today, I want you to think about how you act in certain settings. Sometimes I'll talk to parents and they'll tell me, my child doesn't, I'm so glad they act so well for you in school because they don't act that way at home. Or maybe you act a different way when you're around your grandparents, or maybe when you're at, your church or your synagogue or your temple. Maybe when Mr. Cranmer comes in the room, you act a little differently, right? Because the setting that you're in will influence how you act. If you find yourself in a serious situation, you're going to probably rise to the occasion, act seriously. If you find you're with your friends goofing off, then you might be goofing off. So setting does influence your actions. So where you are and what's going on around you is going to influence how you act. So we're going to read today a story, and it's an excerpt. That word right here is excerpt. You don't really pronounce the P. From a novel. So as you read, you will write a response to the excerpt, The Girl in the Chicken Coop, from Ozma of Oz. As you read, underline information that may be useful to you when you write your essay. So if you don't have your performance assessment book, why don't you go grab it? You can pause me. And then you can follow along in your book. I'm going to read this out loud. We'll see how long I can. I only get 15 minutes, so we'll see how long this takes me. You can underline information you think might be useful for your essay. So again, the essay is just to kind of focus what we're thinking about. The essay here, actually, I know it's funny, it doesn't come all the way down here, but you're going to answer the question, how does a setting influence a character's actions? How does a setting influence a character's actions? You get a little sneak peek here. While we're reading also, I want you to think about trying to make some connections between this text and a text that you've already read, or maybe a movie that you've seen. So automatically, maybe you're thinking, Oz. Where have I heard Oz before? Okay, so we'll get started thinking again about who the main character is and how, what kind of character traits does she have, and how does the setting of the story affect how she acts. Okay, The Girl in the Chicken Coop by L. Frank Baum. I'm just going to kind of try to get rid of myself here. Okay. At the time the wind began to blow, a ship was sailing far out upon the waters. When the waves began to tumble and toss and to grow bigger and bigger, the ship rolled up and down and tipped sideways, first one way and then the other, and was jostled around so roughly that even the sailormen had to hold up fast to the ropes and railings to keep themselves from being swept away by the wind or pitched headlong into the sea. So you have the author here creating a little bit of drama, a little bit of suspense. And the clouds were so thick in the sky that the sunlight couldn't get through them, so that the day grew dark as night, which added to the terrors of the storm. Setting the mood here, very dark. The captain of the ship was not afraid because he had seen storms before and had sailed his ship through them in safety. But he knew that his passengers would be in danger if they tried to stay on deck. So he put them all into the cabin and told them to stay there until after the storm was over, and to keep brave hearts and not be scared at all, and all would be well with them. Now, among these passengers was a little Kansas girl named Dorothy Gale, who was going with her Uncle Henry to Australia to visit some relatives they had never seen before. Uncle Henry, you must know, was not very well because he had been working so hard on his Kansas farm that his health had given way and left him weak and nervous. So he left Aunt Em at home to watch after the hired men and to take care of the farm, while he traveled far away to Australia to visit his cousins and have a good rest. So alarms should be going off in your head right now. Dorothy, Uncle Henry, Auntie M, Auntie M. Sound familiar? Wizard of Oz? Raise your hand if you've seen The Wizard of Oz. Yes. So this is actually, Wizard of Oz is a series of books. There are, I don't know how many, I think at least 3 or 4. But this would be the second in the series. So Wizard of Oz was the first. So this Dorothy Gale is Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. And so she's come home, and now she's going on a trip with her uncle. This poor Dorothy can't seem to escape danger. Dorothy was eager to go with him on this journey, and Uncle Henry thought she would be good company and help cheer him up, so he decided to take her along. The little girl was quite an experienced traveler, for she had once been carried by a cyclone as far away from home as the marvelous land of Oz, and she had met with a good many adventures in that strange country before she managed to get back to Kansas again. So she wasn't easily frightened, whatever happened, and when the wind began to howl and whistle and the waves began to tumble and toss, our little girl didn't mind the uproar the least bit. Okay, and there you can see a picture. Got Dorothy and Tin Man and the lion and the scarecrow, right? And there's the rainbow over Oz. One thing just to mention is that because of her experience in that setting, she's a different person now. So she's kind of gained some bravery because of those experiences that she had. Of course, we'll have to stay in the cabin, she said to Uncle Henry and the other passengers, and keep as quiet as possible until the storm is over. For the captain says if we go on deck, we may be blown overboard. No one wanted to risk such an accident as that, you may be sure. So all the passengers stayed huddled up in the dark cabin, listening to the shrieking of the storm and the creaking of the masts. Again, creating that mood, scary, dangerous, ominous. I'm going to go back to the sentence. So all the passengers stayed huddled up in the dark cabin, listening to the shrieking of the storm and the creaking of the masts, and the rigging, and trying to keep from bumping into one another when the ship tipped sideways. Dorothy had almost fallen asleep when she was aroused with a start to find that Uncle Henry was missing. She couldn't imagine where he had gone, and as he was not very strong, she began to worry about him and to fear he might have been careless enough to go on deck. In that case, he would be in great danger unless he instantly came down again. The fact that Uncle Henry had gone to lie down in his little sleeping berth, but Dorothy didn't know that. She only remembered that Aunt Em had cautioned her to take good care of her uncle, so at once she decided to go on deck and find him, in spite of the fact that the tempest was now worse than ever, and the ship was plunging in a really dreadful manner. Indeed, the little girl found it was as much as she could do to mount the stairs to the deck, and as soon as she got there, the wind struck her so fiercely that it almost tore away the skirts of her dress. I just want to go back to this word tempest and see if we can use context clues to identify what tempest means. So in spite of the fact that the tempest was worse now than ever. Well, what was worse before? What are we talking about? Oh, the storm. So tempest is a word that describes not just any kind of storm, but a really bad storm. Okay, and did you also understand here that Uncle Henry had gone to lie down? So here you have Dorothy. She's remembering and cautioning that, he's not very strong and he's kind of careless. That he may have been careless and gone up on deck. And meanwhile, she didn't even check to see where he was. She was kind of more careless than he was. Yet Dorothy felt a sort of joyous excitement in defying the storm. And while she held fast to the railing, she peered around through the gloom and thought she saw the dim form of a man clinging to a mast not far away from her. This might be her uncle, so she called as loudly as she could, "Uncle Henry, Uncle Henry!" But the wind screeched and howled so madly that she scarce heard her own voice, and the man certainly failed to hear her, for he did not move. Do you see how she got this joyous excitement in defying the storm? So when you defy somebody, you go against their wishes, right? So if your mom tells you can't have a cookie and you have a cookie anyway, you have defied her. You've gone against what she's told you. So now she's defying the storm. The storm is trying to keep everyone down where it's safe, and she's going out. She's getting excited about that. Risky. So now she sees this man, and she's calling Uncle Henry, but they're not replying. So Dorothy decides she must go to him. So she made a dash forward during a lull in the storm to where a big square chicken coop had been lashed to the deck with ropes. She reached this place in safety, but no sooner had she seized fast hold of the slats of the big box in which the chickens were kept than the wind, as if enraged because the little girl dared to resist its power, suddenly redoubled its fury. With a scream like that of an angry giant, it tore away the rope that held the coop and lifted it high into the air, with Dorothy still clinging to the slats. Oh my goodness. Around and over it whirled this way and that, and a few moments later the chicken coop dropped far away into the sea, where the big waves caught it and slid it uphill to a foaming crest, and then downhill into a deep valley, as if it were nothing more than a plaything to keep them amused. Dorothy had a good ducking, you may be sure, but she didn't lose her presence of mind, even for a second. She kept tight hold of the stout slats, and as soon as she could get the water out of her eyes, she saw that the wind had ripped the cover from the coop, and the poor chickens were fluttering away in every direction, being blown by the wind until they looked like feather dusters without handles. Okay, so just to back up a little bit, do you understand what happened? So there was such horrible wind blowing that she saw this chicken coop, and she saw that it was tied down. So she said, oh, I'll hold on to that so I don't get blown away. Well, the wind, as if to punish her for even attempting to come on board, lifted this chicken coop up. It was so strong, it lifted the chicken coop up and off the ship and into the water, and she was still holding on to it. She got blown into the water. Exactly what she was afraid was going to happen to Uncle Henry happened to her. And so she got flown into the water. The bottom of the coop was made of thick boards, so Dorothy found she was clinging to a sort of raft, with the sides of slats, which readily bore up her weight. So it's holding on. She can hold on. It can hold her weight. After coughing the water out of her throat and getting her breath again, she managed to climb over the slats and stand upon the firm wooden bottom of the coop, which supported her easily enough. Why, I've got a ship of my own, she thought, more amused than frightened at her sudden change of condition. And then, as the coop climbed up to the top of a big wave, she looked eagerly around for the ship from which she had been blown. It was far, far away by this time. Perhaps no one on board had yet missed her, or knew of her strange adventure. Down into a valley between the waves, the coop swept her. And when she climbed another crest, the ship looked like a toy boat. It was such a long way off. Soon it had entirely disappeared in the gloom, and then Dorothy gave a sigh of regret at parting with Uncle Henry and began to wonder what was going to happen next to her. Just now she was tossing on the bosom of a big ocean with nothing to keep her afloat but a miserable wooden hen coop that had a plank bottom and slatted sides, through which the water constantly splashed and wetted her through to the skin. And there was nothing to eat when she became hungry, as she was sure to do before long, and no fresh water to drink, and no dry clothes to put on. Well, I declare, she exclaimed with a laugh, you're in a pretty fix, Dorothy Gale, I can tell you, and I haven't the least idea how you're going to get out of it. Doesn't seem too concerned, does she? She's laughing up here. Why, I've got a ship of my own, she thought, more amused than frightened at her sudden change of condition. And then down here, well, I declare, she exclaimed, with a laugh. You're in a pretty good fix, Dorothy Gale, I can tell you. And I haven't the least idea of how you're going to get out of it. Ugh, she's taken a lot better than I would. A lot better than I would. All right, so for today's lesson, I'm going to attach a doc, and I'm going to, again, take these questions here for you to answer. So make sure you have your book open when you are going to go onto the doc. And then tomorrow we'll look at these questions, and then you're going to plan your writing. So a little bit more to do tomorrow. All right, so look for that doc with the questions to answer, and you can give me some feedback about what you thought about the story. All right, talk to you later. Bye.